coming out on this cold day. But I need to tell you a quick story before I get started. And that is, today, if you go to church, the rows in the back are the most valuable ones. That's where everybody wants to sit. But it wasn't always that way. In the 19th century, you used to have to buy your pew. And the pews in the front were more money than the pews in the back. So come up and get in the good seats. If you're sitting in the back row, you'll be able to see the slides better because of the light. Now, why were the seats in the front of the church more money? That's where the wood stove was, or the coal stove. That's where it was warm. It was cold in the back of the church. So if you can't see the slides, please move up. I won't be offended if you get up and move around. I'm also pretty informal. So if you have questions, don't wait till the end of my presentation. Raise your hand or throw something at me, get my attention, and we'll answer it. We've also taken all the political slides out of our presentations because in our country right now, we like to make jokes about our political situation, but we decided not to do that here.
We do too, though.
What's that?
We do too.
You do too, yes. I do have a co-author on this presentation, Paul Dyke, who is our field technical specialist in Wisconsin. I stole some of Paul's slides for this. I've been asked to cover 3 topics, and I'm going to start with sorting because all cows sort. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay. So let's talk about cow behavior. All cows sort the diets, and most cows sort against long particles. What's a long particle? Anything over 8 millimeters, actually. And so they'll sort against those. They'll dig holes in the TMR to reach the short particles and fine particles. That's anything under 8 millimeters. And then you have some odd cows that instead of sorting against long particles, they sort against the short particles. But by and large, most of them sort against the long particles. And first lactation cows are more aggressive sorters than mature cows. And Jersey cows are more effective sorters than Holsteins. Any of you have brown cows in the audience, or are you all Holstein folks? I guess you're all Holstein folks, or you just don't want to admit it. I will tell you what's happening in the US is you're seeing a resurgence of the Jersey breed because in our market, our processors don't want the fluid anymore. All they want is the pounds of components. They don't have a home for low-fat milk and skim milk. So our focus has been, and my focus today is going to be on how to ship more pounds of components. And I know you get paid very well for your components here. I will say this, and the reason I'm going to talk about sorting is sorting of the TMR actually increases the risk of subacute rumen acidosis, and sorting of the TMR reduces the intake of forage NDF, and that hurts you in the pocketbook because it reduces the pounds of fat and the pounds of protein that you ship. So because of ration sorting, there's 3 diets on every farm. There's the one that nutritionists thinks the cows eat, and I know there's some nutritionists here in the audience. I'm a nutritionist. We all hand the dairy producer a feed sheet, and we assume that's the diet that the cow is being delivered. Well, that may not be true. The other diet is the one that the dairy owner and the feeder thinks is being fed. That's the one they deliver in front of the cow, but in reality, it's the third diet that's actually being eaten, and that's the one that the cow actually eats after sorting the TMR. And we've tried all different things to reduce sorting. We add water, we chop the diet finer, we feed whey or whey permeate, we use wet brewer's grains, anything to try and make the diet sticky and reduce sorting. So we do recognize the importance of sorting. But the bottom line, what I see over and over is that nutritionists think cows are getting enough fiber in their diet. That's true if they eat it all. But a lot of times, it's the fiber that's left the next morning. So, Dr. Trevor DeVries here at Guelph has done some really good work on sorting, and I want to share that with you. I really like this paper because it looks at stage of lactation and parity as affecting sorting behavior of cows. And the other good thing about it is it has 60 cows. It's not a small study with 8 or 10 cows. We've got 30 mature cows and 30 first lactation cows. They were fed once daily, and the diet was formulated for 39 kilos of milk with a 3-5 fat and a 3-3 protein. And the diet contained 52% forage, and it was not a dry diet. That's the other reason why I like this study is we assume that cows sort because the diet is dry. Cows sort because they like the goodies, and the goodies are found in the small particles. The cows were housed in a tie stall barn and milked twice a day. And they collected sorting data at day 53, 81, and 109 days in milk. This is the TMR characteristics. And Ed, is there a pointer on this thing, or?
Yeah, the middle button there.
Middle button. There it is. What I want to point out is the diet's 53% dry matter, so it's not a real dry diet. And I also want to point out that it had 18% long particles and 34% medium particles. And to give you an idea what it looks like, this is not the actual TMR, but it shows you what particles greater than 19 millimeters look like, and particles between 8 and 19 millimeters look like. We consider this group of particles right here, these two groups of particles, to contain the effective fiber in the diet. This third section, which is less than 7 millimeters, that doesn't contain any effective fiber. There may be fiber in there, but it's not effective. It doesn't stimulate cud chewing, doesn't add to the rumen mat. So we really want to focus on making sure cows eat these top two layers very well. So the way this research works, a value of 100 indicates that cows did not sort the diet. A value less than 100 indicates that cows ate less than they were expected to eat, and values over 100 indicate that cows ate more than what they were expected to eat. And so what you can see when we look at first lactation cows, they only ate 92 to 93% of the long particles. They left 7 to 8% of the long particles that were in the diet. Notice they didn't sort against the middle particles, and they didn't sort against the short particles. They ate what you expect. But they sorted in favor of the fine particles. They ate 3 to 4% more of the fine particles than would be expected. So we call this type of sorting cows eating the goodies and leaving the hay or leaving the silage. But what's also important to note is this right here, is that if we look at the physically effective fiber, cows only ate 96 to 97% of what they were expected to eat. So what we're seeing here is that cows are leaving the long particles. And I can tell you that this is better than most. Typically, this number here is 90%. Typically, they leave 10% behind. So this is actually better than what we typically see. If we look at multiparous cows, we see the same thing, that they ate 95 to 96% of the long particles, but that still means they're leaving 4 to 5% of the particles behind. They did not sort against the medium and short particles, but they did sort in favor of the fine particles. They ate about 3% more fine particles. Well, keep in mind that it's in the fine particles where the most fermentable starch is. So when you've got cows eating 3 to 4% more than you expect of the fine particles, the diet they're actually consuming is higher in fermentable starch than you think and lower in effective fiber than you think. And we see again that these cows are leaving somewhere around 3% of the effective NDF in the feed trough. So let's take a look at NDF and effective NDF intake in kilograms per day by stage of lactation. 53 days in milk is the blue line, 81 days in milk is green, and 109 days in milk is yellow. Those numbers weren't picked out of the air. Dr. DeVries picked 53 days because that's about when milk production peaks in mature cows. He picked 81 days because that's about when milk peaks in first lactation cows, and 109 days is about when dry matter intake peaks. And we see that here. We see that NDF intake went up from 53 to 109 days in milk. That's what we would expect. But take a look at the effective fiber intake in kilograms per day. Not much of a change going from 53 to 81 to 109. In fact, the expected effective fiber intake for these first lactation cows should be 4.4 to 4.5 kilos. These cows were short 0.7 to 0.8 kilos per day. In other words, they left that effective fiber in the bunk. When we look at mature cows, we see the same thing. NDF intake increases as we go out into lactation, but no real change in effective fiber intake in multiparous cows over time. In fact, the expected NDF intake for multiparous cows should be 5 to 5.3 kilos. I like to think of it as 11 to 11.5 pounds, thinking in my pound system versus the metric system. So these cows were short 0.8 to 1.1 kilos a day. This actually, if this was a commercial dairy, this would be costing them a lot of money, and I'll show you that coming up. But what this is saying is that the most common sorting pattern that we see is cows under-consuming long particles and over-consuming the short particles, so they end up eating a diet that's high in fermentable starch and low in effective fiber. So you can run this economic analysis at 53, 81, or 109 days. It doesn't change the result. I just chose to focus on 53 days. So if we look at our first lactation cows, they gave 36 kilos with a milk fat of 3.27 and 1.18 kilos of fat. If we look at fat yield at 3.5% fat, which is what their milk fat should be, their milk fat should be at least 3.5. They should have produced 1.26 kilos of fat. So what's the fat loss in kilograms per day? 0.08 kilograms. And based on your February Canadian price of $10.63 per kilo of fat, that lost income is 85 cents a day. We see the same thing with protein. These cows had low protein percent. That was their protein yield. They lost 0.05 kilos of protein. That costs 39 cents. So if you add those two up, for first lactation cows, the total milk income lost is $1.24 per cow per day. Maybe you get paid so much for your milk that doesn't matter to you, but I don't think so. I think that if you lost $1.24 of potential milk income per day per cow, that would get your attention. If we look at the Multiparous cows, they were giving 44 kilos of milk with the 3.17 fat. Now you may say, Dr. Steve, that's low butter fat. But my whole point is the reason there's low butter fat is those cows were sorting that TMR and they didn't consume enough effective NDF. If they had consumed more effective NDF and less fermentable starch, their butter fat would be higher. So this low milk fat is the result of diet sorting, because if we go back to this TMR, okay, it's not high in starch. It's only 16.5% starch, and it's 34% NDF. So it's not an exceptionally hot TMR, but it shows the impact that even a little bit of sorting can have. So if we look at the milk income loss for mature cows, they gave up 0.15 kilos a day of fat, and that's worth $1.59. And we see the same thing in protein. They gave up 0.06 kilos of protein, and that's worth 46 cents. So for Multiparous cows, you're giving up $2.05 of income per cow per day due to ration sorting. What this says is you do want to eliminate ration sorting on your farm. Whether you use whey or molasses-based liquid feeds or wet brewer's grains, you want to do something to reduce sorting because it's costing you milk components. and given your prices for your milk components, which are very good compared to the US, it's quite a bit of income. So, for Dr. DeVries' study, let's summarize it. First off, most cows sort against long particles. All cows consumed less physically effective NDF or physically effective fiber than expected. First lactation cows consumed 6 to 7% less long particles. Mature cows consume 4 to 5% less long particles. Days in milk did not affect sorting behavior. They were equal opportunity sorters. They sorted the same at 53, 81, and 109 days in milk. The first lactation cows sorted the TMR more aggressively than the Multiparous cows for fine particles. And the sorting behavior reduced expected milk income due to a loss in milk component yield. And like I said, the sorting in this study is less than on most farms. We're showing sorting in this study of 4 to 5% in mature cows, 6 to 7% in first lactation cows. The average for most farms is 10%. Cows consume 10% less long particles than expected. So you say, well, Dr. Steve, that's one study, that's 60 cows. Well, here's 50 dairies. This is a study done by the University of Minnesota. It's 50 freestall dairies, and what they did is they sampled the TMR, they shook it out at feed delivery, then they took 3 samples during the day, and then they measured what was left 24 hours later. This feed was pushed up 3 to 12 times a day, depending on the dairy. My guess is the ones that pushed up 12 times a day, they had one of those Lely robots that pushed up the feed. I don't think if you had to pay a person, you'd have that person push up 12 times a day. And these 50 herds averaged 88 pounds of milk. Okay, so let's look at what happened to the change in NDF and crude protein intake over time. At put down, the TMR contained 30.6% NDF. As you can see, the NDF of the TMR increased during the day. Why is that? Cows sorted in favor of short particles. They ate more short particles and left the long particles. So the composition of the TMR is changing during the day. Instead of 30.6, by 6 hours later, the NDF content was 34%. And by the next morning in the refusals, it was 37.4%. So the NDF content of the TMR increased by 22% during this time period. This is the average for 50 farms. You see why I'm saying 10% sorting is average, and it can actually be much higher. Look at what happened to crude protein. The TMR started at 17.5% crude protein. By 6 hours later, the TMR was 16.7% crude protein, and by the next day, it was 15.9% crude protein. Again, we've got cows sorting against long particles, leaving the NDF, and over-consuming short particles, consuming more of the protein and the starch. So NDF was increased by 22%, crude protein was decreased by 9%. And it's ration sorting that's causing lower than desired milk fat and milk protein because they're not consuming the NDF that you expect them to consume. And again, this is 50 farms. So there's really three main types of sorting that goes on your dairies. This is the most common pattern. And by the way, this data is from 70 dairy farms in a study that QLF conducted last year. We hired a bunch of interns and turned them loose on 70 farms in the Midwest, in Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa, and South Dakota. And we had 70 farms. So the most common pattern we saw is what I call eat the goodies and leave the hay or silage. This is the classic sorting. Cows sort against the long particles. These are 19 millimeter particles. And so during the day, you see an increase in the number of 19 millimeter particles in the TMR. They don't sort for medium particles, and they don't sort against short particles, but they sort in favor of the fine particles. So in other words, they overconsume these fine particles and underconsume these long particles. You want to prevent this by using a molasses liquid product like Liquid Feed International makes, and to make the diet sticky. That's the difference between molasses-based liquid feeds and water and whey. Water and whey don't make the diet sticky. Molasses makes the diet sticky. It causes the fine particles to stick to the long particles and really reduces the ability of the cow to sort that diet. The second pattern that we see is leave the hay and can't find the goodies. Again, during the day, you're going to see the composition of the TMR change. They're going to leave the hay and leave the long particles, and it's going to increase in the TMR. They're not going to sort against the medium particles or the short particles, and in this case, they don't sort in favor of the fine particles. So what ends up happening here is you get less than expected fiber intake, and that leads to reduced milk fat and milk protein yields. The previous pattern is actually more serious because they overconsume these fine particles. It can lead to subacute rumen acidosis and lower milk component yields. With pattern 2, we may not see subacute rumen acidosis, but we do see reduced components. And finally, the third pattern that you might see on your farm, and by the way, the only way you know what's going on your farm is if you get your nutritionist to get out there with the Penn State particle shaker box and shake out your TMR. Shake it out when you put it out, then shake it out 2 hours, 6 hours, 8 hours later. And then if you want to look at refusals, they can shake it out 12 hours or 24 hours later. So in this scenario, I lost my pointer, but in this scenario, they're just eating the goodies. They are over-consuming the fine particles in the diet, not sorting against the long particles. And this can lead to SARA due to excess fermentable carbohydrate intake. So the question is, how can we reduce sorting on your farms? Well, in these 70 farms, we looked at farms that added liquid or not. Now that's any liquid, whether they added water, whey, or molasses-based liquid supplements. We looked at the effect of liquid inclusion on sorting on these 70 farms. The blue bars represent no liquid. The green bars represent liquid. And what you can see is that the farms that were not adding any liquid, percent of original, if it was 100, it would mean no sorting. It's 140, which means across these 70 farms, a lot of these farms, these cows were leaving the forage. When they put liquid in, it was reduced from 140 to 120. So they didn't stop the sorting completely, but they reduced it in half. Again, no sorting of medium particles, no sorting against short particles. There was a trend for sorting in favor of the short particles. In other words, if this was 100, there'd be no sorting, but without any liquid, these cows only consumed 15% more than they were supposed to. When we put liquid in, we basically eliminate sorting of the fine particles. So inclusion of liquid reduces sorting of the top screen, and cows consume more long particles. Adding liquid prevented the sorting of fine particles. We took this one step further. We looked at the effect of different liquid types on sorting. So what we have here is the yellow bars represent water added to reduce sorting. The blue bars represent molasses liquid feed to reduce sorting. The black bars represent none, and the purple bars represent whey, whether it's cheese whey or whey permeate. When we look at, again, the way this is set up, a value of 100 indicates no sorting. A value over 100 indicates that the cows were leaving those particles and not consuming them. So when we look at the long particles, if they added nothing, that's a value of about 130%. So those cows were only consuming 70% of the long particles in the TMR. Adding whey did not prevent the sorting of long particles because it doesn't add stickiness. Adding water did prevent some of the sorting. It cut it in half. It went from 130 to 115, but they were still leaving 15% of the long particles. It was only when molasses was being fed that we eliminated the sorting against the long particles. This is on 70 farms. Okay, so not all these farms fed liquid supplement, but of those 70 farms that were feeding liquid supplement, they reduced the sorting against long particles completely compared to water or whey or nothing. Again, no sorting of the medium particles. There was actually a little sorting in favor of the short particles, and you can see that whey actually encouraged the consumption of short particles. These cows on these farms that were feeding whey, they actually consumed 10% more than expected of the short particles. But again, adding molasses or water prevented that. Again, there was no sorting of the pan in this case. But the bottom line is whey did not prevent the sorting of the long particles. Neither did water. Water reduced it in half, but didn't prevent it. It was only molasses that was effective in completely reducing sorting. Again, that's because we're adding stickiness. The short particles stick to the long particles, and the cows can't separate them out. So I want to finish up my section on sorting with some more work done by Dr. DeVries. And this is a study where he actually looked at liquid feed. He had a control diet with no liquid feed. Then he had a diet where liquid feed was added to the diet. This particular liquid was 41% sugar, 33% crude protein. And you can see that the sugar went from 4% to 5.4%. And he was feeding the liquid at 4.1% of diet dry matter, which is actually 5.8 pounds as fed of this particular product, or 2.62 pounds of dry matter from the liquid supplement. And this liquid supplement was manufactured by Liquid Feed International. If we look at what happened, the particle size distribution of the TMR with the shaker box, we tended to increase the long particles on the top screen, no real change in the middle screen. But if we look at what happened on the short and fine screens, we actually stuck more of those short and fine particles to the long particles, because the short and fine particles made up 54% of the total particles in the TMR when no liquid was fed. The short and fine particles made up 50.1% of the TMR. Did short and fine particles disappear? No, but they got stuck to the long particles and got stuck to the medium particles, so the cows couldn't sort them out. So there was less sorting, more NDF intake, and if I was to show you the response to these cows, it was tremendous when it came to milk yield and component yield. I like this study because Dr. DeVries used really high-producing cows. In other words, the control cows in this study were milking 98 pounds of milk. The cows that got liquid were milking, I believe, 107 pounds of milk. So there was a 9-pound difference in milk yield, driven by higher dry matter intake and less sorting. So that's the first part of my talk, sorting. The take home for you is that if you're not doing anything to prevent sorting on your farm, it's costing you pounds of fat and pounds of protein. And depending on how severe the sorting is, you could be having subacute ruminal acidosis, or you could be really suffering from a lower fat test than you should be. One of the things that I have seen as a change in our industry over the last 10 years is we used to think if you had high milk production, you had to live with low butterfat. I don't see that anymore. We've actually improved our knowledge of how to feed cows. I'm seeing quite a few herds that are milking 40 kilos with a 4.0 butterfat. And so it is possible to maintain high butterfat at the same time of getting high production. So you need to do something to reduce sorting, and the most effective way to reduce the sorting of long particles is to use a molasses-based liquid supplement. And I showed you that not addressing sorting can be costing you $1 to $2 a day in milk income. So now let's switch gears. I've been asked to speak about dry cow strategies and how to feed dry cows. Well, first off, if you're going to use a liquid supplement, in feeding dry cows, you want to formulate one that's 3% potassium or lower. LFI can do that with different ingredients that they have. In the liquid supplement, you want to keep the DCAD, dietary cation anion difference, slightly neutral or slightly positive by balancing the potassium with chloride and sulfur. And you want to feed a liquid supplement, and don't fall out of your seats now. You want to feed a liquid supplement at 1.5 to 2.2 kilos per day. Why is that? I'm basing that recommendation on research that Dr. Kai Yuan is going to show you later today. I will show you a little bit of it now, but he's going to go into more detail. The other thing is we want sugar in the dry cow diet to be 7.5 to 8.5. Why is that? Let's look at, from an evolutionary perspective, what the cow was designed to eat. She was designed to eat pasture or hay. What's the sugar content of pasture or hay? It's typically, if it's made right, is going to be anywhere from 7 to 11% sugar, and especially it could be higher than that if you're using some improved varieties of ryegrass, pasture, or orchard grass. The point is, before we started taking soybeans and extracting the oil out and extracting them with chemical solvents, soybeans are high in sugar. They're 12% sugar. Before we started feeding cows soybean meal, canola meal, solvent-extracted protein meals, and fermented feeds, corn silage, alfalfa silage, her normal diet was 8% sugar. That's what she could handle. So it's not that we're talking about doing something really wacky here. We're talking about feeding that cow the diet that she was created to eat. She's created to eat a high sugar, low starch diet. Cows do not do well on high starch diets. So our goal was to be between 7.5 and 8.5% total sugar, because Kansas State University did a study where they took the sugar up to 8.5% in a fresh cow diet, and they got 1.5 kilos. If I did my math right, it's 3 pounds, 1.5 kilos more dry matter intake in the first 4 weeks of lactation. You know what that does to the health of the liver? Having a cow consume 1.5 kilos more dry matter in the first 4 weeks, she mobilizes less body fat. Fat doesn't build up in the liver makes more glucose. And it doesn't take a lot of fat to shut down the liver. It only takes 5% fat in the liver to shut down or reduce glucose production from that liver. So my whole goal in this whole big thing in my talk today is to show you how to boost intake in your close-up cows so that as fresh cows, they eat more, they mobilize less body fat, their livers stay healthy, they don't get DAs, they don't get ketosis, and Dr. Kai is going to show you a way to really reduce metritis. So we want to use the same liquid supplement for our lactating cows, and we want to feed it at a rate of 1.8 to 2.3 kilos. Again, our goal is to have our total sugar between 7 and 8%. Why is that? Last year, we summarized a meta-analysis of 25 studies. What that meta-analysis showed, and a meta-analysis is where you take the data from 25 studies, you put it in a big database, and you look for trends. Well, one of the trends that came out was 3.5% fat-corrected milk was maximized at 6.75% total sugar for all cows, 7.2% total sugar for cows milking 40 kilos or higher. The other thing, other trends that came out was that milk fat yield and milk protein yield were highest when the diets contained 7 to 8% total sugar. So we're not pulling these numbers out of the air. We have good reason to be recommending this. So here's a typical product that Liquid Feed International can make. You can see that it is 3% potassium. Where's my potassium? 3% potassium. It's 45 sugars on a dry matter basis. And the chloride and sulfur come naturally with the ingredients. And you can see that the DCAD is basically neutral, plus 9.48 milliequivalents per 100 grams. So if you're feeding a negative DCAD diet or an anionic diet, using this liquid is not going to impact the DCAD of your diet because it's basically neutral. There is some protein in this for flowability. We also make a 12% protein version of this product as fed. Notice no added fat. We don't like feeding fat to the pre-fresh cow. So that's just the fat that normally comes with the ingredients. So let's talk about a real pre-fresh diet from a real farm. This is Swiss Lane Dairy, and you're going to hear more about this from Dr. Kai. They feed a modified Goldilocks diet. They don't go full-blown Goldilocks with a huge amount of straw because they've got low potassium grass hay. So they feed 6.75 pounds of grass hay, 2.7 pounds of wheat straw, 28 pounds of corn silage. This dairy is in Michigan, so they are feeding wet beet pulp. They feed a pre-fresh grain, ground corn, wheat midds, and we're feeding 4 pounds as fed of Dairy Transition 6. What I want you to note is, one, we're not shorting these cows on metabolizable protein. They're getting 1,300 grams of metabolizable protein. So the response you're going to see when Dr. Kai presents his paper is not due to a shortage of metabolizable protein. Second, our diets are only 16% starch and 8.65% sugar. So we hit our goal. Our goal was to be at 8.5% sugar. We're at 8.65. If you want to look at their high cow diet and the way this farm operates, after they freshen, they go into a fresh pen and they only stay in that fresh pen 3 to 7 days. If they're healthy, by day 3 to 7, they move on to this high cow diet. And this diet is balanced for over 45 kilos of milk. It's balanced for 109 pounds of milk. But what I want you to notice is without the addition of the liquid supplement, even though they're still feeding whey permeate and wet beet pulp, their sugar is only 5.6%, but their starch is 27.8. Again, we're not shorting them on methionine and lysine. Plenty of methionine and lysine in these diets. When we put the QLF liquid supplement in, again, we're feeding 4 pounds as fed, and you want to feed 2 kilos. We lower the starch to 26. Our soluble fiber is 8.77, and now our sugar is 7.65%. We've hit our goal of a minimum of 7.5%. and Dr. Kai will show you the performance data later. What I just want to I want to kind of get you real excited about Dr. Kai's presentation. This is what you're going to see. Pre-fresh intake went from 29 pounds to 35.9 pounds. 7.2 pounds more intake. And by the way, this is 7 months of data from July 6th, 2016 to January 31st, 2017. Hundreds of cows per treatment, because this dairy milks 1,500 cows conventional and 500 cows by robots. And so all the dry cows are in one barn. They have a far-off dry and a close-up group. So there's hundreds of cows that have gone through this study. Highly significant increase in dry matter intake. If we look at their conventional barn milk yield, it went up 15.6 pounds. And you're going to say, Dr. Steve, that's impossible. I don't believe that. I'm telling you, you guys tell me cows don't lie. This is real cow data. These cows aren't lying. They ate 7 pounds more dry matter pre-fresh. They ate at least 5 pounds more dry matter post-fresh. Their livers were healthy. They were not insulin resistant. They went up 15.6 pounds of milk. And if we look at average production through 200 days, it averaged 8.3 pounds more over 200 days in milk, and on an energy-corrected basis, 9.1 pounds with more pounds of fat and protein. And based on the US component prices, that's an extra $1.48 a cow per day. It would be even higher here in Canada because your component prices are higher than our US prices. My point is, when you drive intake in the pre-fresh cow and you drive intake in the fresh cow, they peak higher. That leads to greater persistency throughout the entire lactation, and that's why we're averaging 9.1 pounds of milk. So does QLF or liquid feed pay during the transition period and lactation? Let me tell you how I did this. It really gets my goat when a nutritionist or a feed company person stands up here and tells you, my additive's only going to cost you 10 cents a cow a day. They don't factor in any impact on dry matter intake. That's not fair because you're paying for that dry matter intake. So I have factored in the dry matter intake here. I have factored in the 6 pounds, I have factored in 6 pounds of extra dry matter intake in those pre-fresh cows. I have factored in the extra dry matter intake over 200 days in milk. And I'm using 12 cents per pound of dry matter or 11.86 cents per pound of dry matter. Bottom line in all of this is when you add these two numbers up, $98 and $18.48, break-even milk response at $18 milk is 3.24 pounds per day. But they observe 9.1 pounds of energy-corrected milk over the entire lactation. So their return is 9.1 pounds of milk minus 3.24, which equals 5.86 times 18 cents. Their net, when you account for the cost of the liquid supplement and the cost per extra dry matter intake, they're netting $1.06 more per cow per day. What do you think this dairy's doing when they see data like this? The entire herd's on liquid supplement out to 200 days in milk. Everybody's getting liquid supplement pre-fresh at 4 pounds, and everybody's getting liquid supplement post-fresh out to 200 days at 4 pounds. To show you another trial on a conventional dairy, a little smaller size, more suitable for Canada. This is a dairy in Iowa, and students at Dordt College actually did this study. I tease Paul Dyke, who went to Dordt College. I say, Paul, and Paul is Dutch Reformed. I say, Paul, you can't question this data because God dwells on earth at Dordt College. You tell me that all the time, so you can't question this data. Anyway, that was a joke, it bombed, sorry. 400 cow dairy. The dairyman wanted to solve problems. He had sorting pre-fresh and post-fresh. He had low milk fat test and early lactation, and he wanted higher P milk. Our technical field specialist in that area told him that if he used liquid supplement at 4 pounds per cow per day and used dairy transition 6, we would solve all these problems. Because this is a senior student project and they had to do the whole project basically in 1 semester. In other words, they had to run this project from September 1st through the end of November, analyze the data, and turn in a report by the middle of December so they could get their grade for their class. We only went out to the first 30 days in milk. What we saw, again, feeding liquid supplement at 4 pounds or 1.5 to 2 kilos per cow per day, boosted pre-fresh intake 1.7 pounds, and this is a mixed pen of mature and first lactation animals. When we look at our first lactation cows in the first 30 days in milk, their intake went up 4.5 pounds. If we look at our mature cows in the first 30 days in milk, their intake went up 2.6 pounds. I can tell you that in the first 30 days in milk, you should be getting 2 pounds of milk for every pound more intake. So I can account for 5.5 pounds of milk just from the extra dry matter intake. What actually happened? If we look at our second lactation cows, they went up 8.5 pounds of milk. If we look at our mature cows, they went up 15.4 pounds of milk. Again, we're seeing the same responses that we saw at Swiss Lane. 15 plus pounds of milk in the first 30 to 40 days of lactation. Again, I will tell you, I believe that's being driven, 1, by extra dry matter intake, reduction in sorting, and what I'm going to talk about in the last part of my talk, which is fiber digestion. But you'll say, Dr. Steve, these first lactation heifers didn't respond. Well, they did on an energy corrected basis because these first lactation animals produced 0.56 pounds more fat. Second lactation animals produced 1.23 pounds more fat and more protein. And so our first lactation animals produced 4.7 pounds of milk more on an energy corrected basis. One thing about cows is we can't tell her where to put the energy. She may eat more and consume more energy, but she controls where that energy is partitioned. And I think what happened here is that these first lactation animals were on the small side, and she partitioned that energy towards growth and less towards milk. versus our second and third and greater lactation animals, which position more of that energy towards growth. Oh, I'm out of time, sorry. Let me speed up. Fiber digestion. This is from our meta-analysis. Take-home message is you need 7 to 7.5% total sugar to optimize NDF digestibility. This is NDF digestibility. It was optimized when the diet was 4.1% sucrose and 3.4% other sugars. NDF digestibility is also optimized on a higher forage diet. You can see that the optimum forage diet in our data set was 51 to 57. I can tell you there are a lot of dairies now feeding 60 to 65% forage and getting good milk because of improvements in corn silage digestibility, the use of BMR, and improvements in alfalfa varieties. Does sugar impact diet digestibility? Yes. Here's a 60% forage diet. Liquid molasses replaced high moisture shell corn, and NDF and ADF digestibility was optimized at 7.4% total sugar in the diet. Here's another study, also from the same location. 60% forage diet. Sugar source is sucrose. This is NDF digestibility. NDF digestibility was optimized at 7.1% total sugar in the diet. You can see the response is over 7.5 units of NDF digestibility. And when we look at ADF digestibility, it's an 11 unit, a little under 11 unit increase in ADF digestibility. So when you boost ADF and NDF digestibility, you reduce rumen fill. Cows consume more dry matter. But again, 7.1% total sugar. So if we look at the meta-analysis, 25 studies, it says 7.5% sugar. 2 studies from the USDA Dairy Forage Center says 7.1 to 7.4% total sugar boosts NDF digestibility. You also increase organic matter digestibility when you have 7% or more sugar, and the increase is 5 to 10 units. And we see the same thing here. The net result of increased NDF and organic matter digestibility is an increase in dry matter intake. You can see that in all cows, the average response was 2.1 pounds more dry matter intake. This is averaged across the entire lactation. If we look at cows actually producing less than 73 pounds of milk, the response was even greater. My point is, you're going to get more feed intake when you boost organic matter digestion, ADF digestion, and NDF. And I'm going to stop there. I'm out of time. But bottom line is, why did we see those large increases in milk in early lactation? Reduced sorting, higher dry matter intake, and improved ADF, NDF, and organic matter digestibility. And I'll take any questions. Thank you.
Yeah, we have time for maybe one or two questions, I guess.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Did you say anything as far as ketosis or even other factors when you looked at health?
Can you repeat the question? I'm sorry.
Of the fresh cows, after you fed the liquid supplement, did the health performance improve?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, out to 200 days in milk.
Yeah.
Yes.
So was there noticeable reduction in ketosis or any evidence of that?
Oh, yes. Yes, there was a reduction. There wasn't a lot of fresh cow problems at Swiss Lane. There wasn't a lot of fresh cow problems at that dairy in Iowa. Dr. Kai is going to show you some data later where there was a reduction in DA, reduction in metritis, reduction in overall fresh cow health. Okay, thank you.